Yeah, the other game, Andy, that you have seen that you mentioned earlier on was PSG at Salzburg. What did you make of that match, Andy?
Well, I think in terms of contest, it would have been nice to have a little bit more of a contest. And we spoke on the OTC YouTube channel about how Salzburg are in a bit of a hole at the moment. So you can go and watch that and sort of see what problems Pep Lijnders is having and maybe what input Jurgen Klopp will have when to sort things out when he takes charge of Red Bull's global football in January. But from the PSG perspective, it was just desperately needed. They had to win, and they did. They always look like winning, but they've looked like winning a lot of games in the Champions League this season and not quite got it over the line. Now, of course, I won it up at half-time because Gonzalo Ramos scored. They've really struggled to find the right blend up front in contrast to Barcelona. Certainly in European fixtures, I mean, that Gonzalo Ramos goal was only the fourth they scored in the Champions League this season. And if you say they, obviously Paulo Gazzaniga scored one of them, the Girona goalkeeper for them, going right back to the beginning of the campaign. So they doubled their total in the evening. And they needed that second half. They needed that last 20 minutes or so where they scored a couple, started to look a bit more relaxed and a bit more incisive, because the tension around them has been something else. And the way that they came out for the second half, they were a little bit docile, actually. They didn't really create that much for the first part of the second half. And, we're talking about unexpected stars, really. Desiree Doué coming off the bench, providing an assist and then scoring a goal himself. Made a big difference, and that's great for him. But before that, it didn't feel like Luis Enrique really had the solutions. And while they were unable to put Salzburg away at 1-0, there was always a little glimmer that Salzburg were nowhere near enough to take advantage of. They weren't good enough to take advantage of that anxiety. A better team, I think, would have put them in a really quite difficult spot.
Of course, it was a must-win game for both teams, Lars, because both of them find themselves at the wrong end of the Champions League table, in the exit zone, as it were. Salzburg never looked, though, like they were going to trouble PSG, and PSG is still in that danger zone of the Champions League.
You're right. They did not look like they were anywhere near challenging them. I have to say, just PSG this season have been really interesting to me, and it's a blow because I am nothing if not a sustainable podder. A green podder. Yeah. I very much believe in reusing material if you can. For years and years, it's been amazing. I could just make the same jokes all over again about PSG, but you can't. But this season, they're very different. They've gone in a completely different direction. This sort of nonsense Galactico stuff they were doing, they're not doing it all. They're signing more young players. And Andy mentioned Desiree Doué. He's a case in point. They've forked out 50 million for a young, talented player from a Liga rival, rather than trying to sign a big, flashy name. And this is kind of typical of what they're doing now, the way they're trying to build this squad. And you look at that with midfield with Zaire Emery usually, but he wasn't there now. But Vitinha and Neves Vitinha, Neves and Zaire Emery, that could well be the best midfield on the planet in 3 years. But they're all a little bit young still, and it's kind of fascinating to me how they're putting this team together. But on the offside of that is that they have had games where they've struggled to kind of tilt it in their favour and where they've lacked a little bit of cutting edge. They are a little bit in trouble in the Champions League, but if you look at where they've dropped points, the draw against PSV was a travesty, really, in terms of chances created and stuff. They should have won that. Same with the game against Atleti, which they lost somehow. So many chances. Okay, they were not up at the races really against Bayern Munich. Bayern Munich are very good. But even in the Arsenal game, I thought they were very competitive. And it's become a complete inversion of what we used to say about PSG. They used to be this collection of stars that had unbelievable individual talent, but they didn't always hang together. They're now a much more youthful team, a much more balanced team in some ways, but sometimes they do lack a little bit of that cutting edge, which used to be all they had. So it's really fascinating how it's completely changed. I do wonder if Gonzalo Ramos coming back into it, he scored here, looked a little bit rusty as far as I could tell, but
Yeah.
I wonder
Yeah.
if he could be the solution up front, both for the work rate he brings, but also the presence in the box.
Well, for the moment, he has to be, just because Luis Enrique has made it incredibly clear through his actions that he doesn't rate Randal Kolo Muani at all. A 100 million signing that he oversaw, and now he's decided he's completely out on. I mean, he's had loads of opportunities to try him, but I think it was kind of instructive in this game that when they wanted to kill the game, they did bring on Desiree Doué and Kolo Muani and Marco Asensio, just sitting there with 2 layers on because they're not getting any action. I find this thing about them not being able to put their chances away absolutely fascinating, because after the Atletico game, Luis Enrique talked about it in the press conference. He said, "This is a bad joke. This has gone on too long." But I think there's only a certain, if it keeps happening again and again and again, it's not luck, is it? It's something else. That they get themselves into these positions, that they play really well in many cases, that they create chances and they can't put them away. Now, after that Atletico game, and with the Bayern game as well, although that was sort of coloured by the sending off of Ousmane Dembele, you thought, right, okay, they need to find a way to make their Liga and Champions League form the same. But what we weren't expecting is them to bring their Champions League form into Liga. And you look at those 2 games that they played domestically directly before this Salzburg game. They don't beat either Nantes or Auxerre, 2 of, at least on paper, the weakest teams in the division. They have 48 shots and they score 1 goal, which is Achraf Hakimi. Now, this is perilously close, because obviously there will be people listening to this and going, well, the answer's obvious, isn't it? It's Kylian Mbappe. I don't know if it is, because if you go back to last season, in the semi-final against Borussia Dortmund, they have 44 shots over the 2 legs and do not manage to score. And, there comes to a point where, is it luck? Well, if it's 1 or 2 games, maybe you can say yes. Is it carelessness? Maybe it's that. Maybe Luis Enrique's coaching and focus is on somewhere else. I mean, what I find interesting is you talked about that midfield, and I agree. I think it's a good blend of players and it's a good blend of aesthetics. But I just don't see where the goals come from in that midfield. That's the problem. I mean, you have Vitinha, who is the most likely of those guys to score a goal and scored 7 in Ligue 1 last season. And of course, he's been playing as a defensive midfielder for most of this season. So how's he going to get in a position to score? So it's something that Luis Enrique is very good at, just brushing off criticism and going, "Oh yeah, you lot don't know what you're talking about. You never even played the game," sort of thing. But I think people are right to question him.
Yeah, no, that is an issue. The funny thing about calling for Mbappe is that, I mean, I've done my research today. It's stats Lars, isn't it? They're actually averaging more goals per game in Liga generally so far this season than they were last season, and they're averaging a higher XG produced per game in Liga. So Mbappe has left, and at least on paper, they've become a better attacking team in the league. But in the Champions League on these big nights, maybe they lack someone who has the confidence and has the sort of the swagger and just being, I am the guy and I'm going to fix this. And when you have a 100 million euro forward signing that doesn't work out for you at all, that's gonna be a problem to most teams. Intrigued to see how this, I mean, maybe I'm encroaching on game of the week territory here, but their next 2 games domestically is against Lyon and Monaco, which it seems interestingly set up after those 2 draws.
And it's not just the domestic games they have to consider, but in January they've got 2 big games in the Champions League, Man City, then at home to Man City and then away to Stuttgart as well on the final group game. They haven't got a huge amount of time to sort things out, have they? Although, having said that, maybe it's a good time for them to be playing Man City. Andy.
Yeah, well, I mean, we can say that now, Dotton, but like in 4 or 5 weeks, maybe it'll be different. I guess we've been saying this about Manchester City for a number of weeks. Like, they'll get over it. And maybe they won't get over it. I don't know. But I think there must have been part of PSG's staff and support who looked at that game where City lost at Juventus and went, oh, this is a massive pain, because they need something out of it now. They actually have to come to Paris and try and win the game, because we've talked before about like the fact that teams like maybe would like go into the last 2 games with a little bit less intensity. You know, they're unused to having Champions League games in January. But there'll be some weary legs there, especially for Premier League teams after Christmas. But now City don't have an option. They have to go for it. They have to really try and beat PSG. So I think those are 2 really devilishly hard games. I think PSG, and that's why this Salzburg game is so vital, because Stuttgart should have had more points than they have had already. They played pretty well. And they sort of kept themselves in the hunt by thrashing young boys. But yeah, I think this was, the way it was framed in France was a sort of stay of execution for the moment. And I think that's probably the best way of describing it. So PSG needed this, but it's not the solution to everything.
Kolo Muani, who we've touched on already, didn't need this. We talked about him at the end of November.
I was going to say PSG didn't need him.
Well, that's what I meant. That's exactly what I meant. We talked about Kolo Muani at the end of November on Ask OTC, and we concluded then that, look, Luis Enrique just doesn't fancy him. He ain't going to get a game, or barely a game, with Luis Enrique there as coach. So the conclusion is he's got to move on, hasn't he, Lars? And there is some interest in him, I would have thought.
Yeah, but it seems a weird one because he's 26. He should be at his peak. They've spent a lot of money on him. He looked very good for Frankfurt. I did think the transfer fee was big, but not entirely. There was some justification for it. But I guess with PSG, if they're trying to not be a total circus in terms of how the club is run, you can't just completely write off €100 million asset like that.
No,
and you have to, and also, so maybe a loan somewhere for half a season to see if he can rediscover his groove, build up some confidence. I mean, maybe that's the kind of thing they could do.
These are 3 of the teams within the Premier League that are interested in him: Newcastle, West Ham, and Chelsea.
The Chelsea thing, yeah. Chelsea definitely need more sort of attackers who can also play out wide. They don't have that. They have none of those.
So you haven't lost your humour. But which of those 3 teams?
It's just Todd Bowley going to the middle aisle at the Little and just going losing his mind again.
So perhaps he shouldn't be going there on loan then to Chelsea, because he'll find himself sitting on the bench again then. Yeah,
No, I think Newcastle is an interesting one out of the ones you listed, because they, I'm sure, without going to, this is on the continent, not on the island, but I'm sure Newcastle were a little bit disappointed to have to lose Yankuba Minte in particular for PSR reasons in the summer, and it has looked all season that they could need just one extra body in forward areas who can bring something a little different. That they will be taking a player whose confidence, no doubt, is not at its highest point. So for someone who's really struggled to get in the team at PSG, confidence maybe not the best to be thrown into a team that's struggling a bit in the Premier League. It's a big ask, but in terms of who could really use him, that would make a lot of sense to me.